Well, Tech Rodeo, we're really excited to sit here with Chris, founder of Mainline, and hear about how he made the leap from marketing and business at A&M into second-time founder here in Houston. Chris, really appreciate you joining Risk Profile and excited to talk about what Mainline's up to.
I love it, and thanks for having me. It's funny, when I saw the first invite for Risk Profile, I kind of freaked out a little bit, and I was like, did I not catch something? Am I in trouble with it? So good to hear that it's something fun.
Well, the whole concept of Risk Profile is really to tell the story of what makes an entrepreneur for the purpose of really encouraging people that are out there that maybe always wanted to start something but are now kicking themselves because that an idea has come behind. I see such a groundswell of tech companies and founders here in Houston in general that wanted to have a place to really share those stories and be an encouragement. So kind of with that in mind, what made you convinced that you had a problem to solve in esports, and then why, what was the thought process like for you in saying, I am the guy to go do that?
Well, so first of all, I a lot of times I tell people I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm entrepreneurial, which was the idea of when I was starting my first company. We had some investors that were interested. I mean, we were very, very lucky, but we had some investors that were interested before we actually even had to start the development of the product, which doesn't happen very often. So that's a great thing about Houston, is that we had people interested that early. And that's why I joke about that is, well, entrepreneurs take massive risks and put in their own money. At the time, I was like, oh, you're going to give me money? I'll start this company. So fast forward, my first company, Mainline, started as a subsidiary, and it was really out of both a little bit of greed, I guess you could say. Yeah. Not me personally, in terms of, we saw an opportunity. My first company was in the traditional sports space, and we knew that esports was already pretty big and it was going to get much, much bigger. So we saw an opportunity to kind of go after a market rather than wait for somebody to come to us. In my previous company, you would license our software. We didn't want to wait for somebody to come license our software. Instead, we wanted to selfishly, greedily own that vertical. Yeah. So I have no problem saying that I was very naive going into that. We acqui-hired a company out of South Carolina where we had a bunch of rock stars that knew more about esports than I'll ever know, even to this day. But what really changed our company was in the college space. Things have always been the Wild West, no pun intended, with the Outlaws. But there was an opportunity to put continuity in the space, and we saw that by being a little bit of a behind-the-scenes software that all the colleges can use. Yeah. So it was more just like, oh, there's an opportunity here of an underserved market in terms of continuity in the space, because it was all over the place. And then a partnership helped us.
So what does continuity mean? That is the ability to deliver a consistent experience across tournaments. Is that what you're kind of thinking?
Yeah, across schools and conferences. So right now, there's 170 universities plus that tout a varsity program. There's a lot more that have a club program. There's universities that do it through rec or student activities or intramurals. We wanted to come in to put in the groundwork, what we call like picks and shovels, of every university using the same software, so that there was continuity there. Like,
so it's it's almost like the fields that they're used to playing their professional sports on. They all have the same dimensions and the same. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So what was it like? When did you get your first client in terms of a university, and when did things really start to take off in terms of timeline?
Well, so our very first client from a product perspective, our first big client was ESPN, but that was more on the production side of our company. We are a product first company, and our first client was A&M, because I'm an Aggie and I just would not stop harassing them. And we were trying to get them to. We were trying to convince them to run a pilot program. Yeah. Hey, A&M, you can now run a sanctioned esports tournament alongside your brand, and you can dip your toe into esports with our software. We're not going to charge you an arm and a leg, and you can go get sponsors for it. That was like our first experience.
And this was what time?
Oh, let's see, it was May of 2019, so pretty recent. Yeah. So really, it's almost scary to share this. So May 2019, we did the pilot, and we went, man, we might be onto something here. In the fall, because we do things on like an academic school year, when Texas and LSU and St. Thomas and A&M came back on board, we were like, man, we might be really onto something. Right. And then that's when the multimedia rights holders in the space came to us and said, let's do an enterprise level deal. So our largest is Learfield IMG. They have 92% of the Power 5 conferences schools.
So as a channel partner, somebody that really already has these existing sales relationships, you don't have to build out your own sales team, and you're just providing your white labeled solution to each one of these universities in an effort of standardizing the way that these tournaments.
Yeah, in fact, every single school, it's kind of like tamu.mainline.gg. So every school, every conference, it's kind of the structure of the URL. But super important to say, like, we'll probably get rid of that even because we want the schools and their users to know it's like the school owns that, essentially. Yeah.
Now that makes sense. So as you're thinking about this growth and you really realize you're onto something, you run in headwinds into COVID. Mm-hmm. How did your universities react to did you have problems getting meetings? Was it like a lot of disruption? And then, did it really take advantage in a certain way of the COVID disruption?
Yeah, I always say it's kind of a bittersweet comment to make is COVID was the best thing that happened to our company because we are a completely digital company. And what's funny is January and February of 2020, that's when we were finalizing the deal with Learfield IMG, but we were talking to every multimedia rights holder in the space. And when Learfield came on board with the enterprise deal in February of 2020, we started rolling out to the schools. Well, obviously March was when COVID hit. By about June, all these MMRs had lost all of their inventory for traditional sports sponsorships, multimedia rights holders. So that's that channel. All of them came to us. We were already talking to them, but they were like, well, we just don't know yet. We don't know. And once they saw like, oh my gosh, these guys have inventory and it's going to be our inventory, meaning it's white labeled. We pretty much signed everybody up. So it was, I say, obviously, a lot of people have gone through really hard times. We got really lucky with the whole deal.
Walk through that process of scale, because one of the hard things for us start to do once you catch the bus is to actually build it and a support organization and have all of those mechanics and processes down pat. And obviously, and the most famous example probably is Robinhood, which has had famously hard times with their customer support.
Diamond hands.
But it's a great visual. What was that like for you?
Well, again, I mean, I wish I could take credit. We were really fortunate. We have an amazing team. But I would say the reason that we won the college market so quickly and put a moat was our product was built purposefully for white labeling and scaling. It's a global platform, but we can onboard 1,000 schools in a week. And we built it that way, which was a competitive advantage because a lot of the big players out there aren't white labelable or flexible. They're white labelable, but it costs a fortune. We were affordable, we were scalable, we could do it extremely quickly, but it was because we knew that that's what we wanted to pursue B2B rather than B2C, okay? And then from a scalability standpoint, I won't lie, you fake it till you make it, right? When we did the pilot, we told everybody like, yeah, we can scale this, no problem. But meanwhile, the developers were having to spin up new instances. Yeah. And then when more schools came on board, it was like, oh my gosh. And then when Learfield signed the big contract in February, we were pretty close at that point, but it still was development, getting in there and customizing some of the stuff for these bigger partnerships. And then by June, July, August, we finally had a true iterative product where now, let's say 5,000 schools wanted to get on board. Yeah. The developers don't even have to touch our software. It's all the admin portal that we have. So we spin it up through our admin.
I love that you were willing to kind of risk it for the biscuit in that way. Once you have an opportunity, you've got to really capitalize on it and take the extra time and really.
I mean, it's anecdotal, but it's important to this discussion because we're going to talk about Houston and esports in Houston and that kind of stuff. But the ESPN deal, they asked us to do an 8-week TV show. Yeah. We had no business. We had a great production team, but it was all competitive gameplay. Yeah. A TV show we'd never done before. And I remember sitting in those studios and the execs from ESPN were sitting in our studios and I was going, well, we're watching it live. So we're in another room and we're all watching it live from the other room. And I remember going, well, if this goes down, because we were sending it to Bristol and Bristol was distributing, I was like, that's going to be the end of my career, but hey, let's give it a shot. And it went down, like 4 episodes in, it went down in the middle and I went, that was fun. Like, that was a fun ride. And then one of their execs came in and I'm kind of like waiting for them to go, what did I do? And they're like, oh, actually the Bristol feed went down. So it wasn't us. And I was like, unacceptable. I didn't really. I was like, thank God. So anyway, but it was awesome because, knees weak, it was just like airplane where he's sweating so much. Yeah, anyway, so.
That's great. I love because in my own career, as we made the leap into launching a startup, we had so many near-death experiences too. We walked into our first demo and we had talked up the software, what we were working on. We moved up to the first client and clicked the first button and nothing happens.
Awesome.
And we're like, we know exactly what's wrong here. We'll be back.
Yeah. We'll be right back. Yeah.
And it was one of those cheesy elevator music kind of playing in the background. And we sent them a note that night. It's like, hey, we figured out the problem. We got it fixed. And can we come back tomorrow?
Did they say okay?
They said okay.
Okay, there you go.
So,
good then.
And I think that, there's such a partnership at the early stage of a company where, once you identify a problem, and you said greed, I would call that really just vision or opportunity. And that opportunity becomes magnetic for both you as the client, as the customer, as the developer trying to solve that need. But for the clients that have this problem and really, can't do it any other way, they get excited because it opens up new opportunities for them too.
Yeah. And by greed, of course, I just meant I don't want to wait for somebody else to come license it. We can do this. So I'm glad we did it. I remember being called a crazy person at first, but ended up being okay.
All good founders have that story. So as you're thinking about your experience and really kind of starting a software company here in Houston, when you first got started with ESPN as a subsidiary, that was
2019, early 2019.
Okay, so early 2019. But before that, you had a company as well.
I did. I started a company called FanReact in 2014. That was a sports social media application. Weirdly enough, Learfield IMG, which was just IMG at the time, was my first client at that company. And I learned a lot from the negotiations of that. And then Major League Lacrosse became our next client. And so, but it was a sports social media application that, think of it like a global fan forum where you could go to your team's forum all in one location. And it was fine. It served its purpose. It was definitely MVP. It was a hybrid HTML application. It was a little clunky. Funny story, one of my friends, this was early on. I didn't know what I was doing. And he said, your search functionality, why don't you just do your search functionality like Twitter does theirs? And I'm like, well, I built the app for $200,000 and Twitter's search functionality is probably $2 billion worth. You know what I mean? That was a real learning experience for me where people are like, why don't you do it like this? And it took everything in me not to, So I started that company in 2014. 2016, we were acquired and we pivoted to creating licensed community applications. And we took off, if you will. We did very, very well. So we were pre-revenue 2014, 2015, 2016. And then in 2017, I think we did 3.2 million just in that 1 year alone. And so, that's kind of where I got my start all here in Houston.
So first time around tech startup, second time around tech startup. What did you see in change in terms of Houston and the community?
Well, so I remember getting involved with, I'm actually mad about this. I used to be way more involved in, going to all the startup meetups and doing those things. And I loved that. And then obviously when you start getting more and more busy as your company hopefully grows and grows and grows, you find excuses not to do that. So I'm judging myself on that. But even 2014, 2015, there were a lot of groups that were doing some really good things about building up the space. And Surge was here back then, and obviously Station, and then you had the Canon coming in at that point. Now Ion. So back then there was a lot of support. Now it was new support for what I was doing, right? There wasn't exactly a lot of social startups in Houston at that time. So we were, yeah. I mean, well, unless you're oil and gas and you were saying that you drilling in the ground was a startup, then yeah, maybe it was. But we obviously taken huge strides as a city to start putting more and more attention into the startup scene. And it's because of there's more VCs coming here, more angel investors coming here. People are becoming a little bit more savvy than asking the question immediately, when are you going to be cash flow positive to a startup that's like for instance, we are spending a lot of money right now, but it was to take over an entire market, right? Nobody really asks us anymore, are you going to be profitable? So I think we're getting over that hump of the unrealistic expectations of, hey, let's talk about your EBITDA, private equity, those types of things. It's like, no, startups have a little bit more risk. That's why you get more equity in the company. So I think it's good. I think we're making a lot of progress there.
No, that's amazing. Now talk about as you're growing in this company, you're dealing with larger scale stakeholders. You're transacting a little bit on the credibility from selling to ING the first time around.
Yeah.
And so when they're backing you and they're talking to you, they have that confidence that you're going to exceed. As you've conquered this collegiate market, are you thinking about what's next in terms of like, are cities the next logical kind of client? Is it, individual leagues, maybe like regional leagues like you would see for tennis or golf or anything else? Like what do you think is the next adopter of this?
I mean, so we focus on college just because we had an opportunity to take it over, and that's what we're doing. We're already moving into the high school space pretty significantly with state associations. Okay. And then there are groups like Learfield IMG in the high school space that essentially are the rights holder for high school sports, right? So we're already talking to all of them about starting to trickle it in there. And then on top of that, we work with pretty big brands already. Just to Chick-fil-A and iHeartMedia, we run esports tournaments for them where it's theirs, and they're doing it as more, I guess you could call it a pilot right now, but they have all these markets, so they're doing it at a regional scale right now. Yeah. So I think you could see that we probably have 10 brands, and then international, like we're talking to Brazil, India, Taiwan, and Spain about replicating our model in their college space as well, because it takes us 30 seconds to turn it on for their market as long as they have a structure in place. So I think next step is obviously high school, brands, and then international.
It makes total sense. As a startup in Houston, there are a lot of tech startups in esports, content generation and kind of the streaming side of things. You've got obviously other kind of tournament sponsors and licensing and marketing and those kinds of things. Have you found it difficult to reach out and talk with other founders, maybe in adjacent spaces in the industry, being from Houston, or has that not been an issue or not something you've really worked?
I mean, that's a fantastic question. I mean, it took us a while, but I needed to get credibility before people would take my call, whether I was living in LA or New York anyway, right? Like a funny story, I won't name them, but there's a massive esports fund that has an amazing reputation. They're known as kind of like the Godfathers started this recent fund. And I remember there was just not a chance I was ever going to get the guy's attention, the founder of this deal. And then, all this news started going out. And then I messaged him on LinkedIn of all things and said, look, I know you're a busy guy, but I'd love to just chat with you. And he responded within 30 seconds. And I think that was more because of all the press that was going out. So I would say, no, it took me time from a company to earn their okay, I guess I'll talk to this guy type deal. Now, does it help being in LA because all of the major game publishers are in LA with Blizzard and Riot, for instance? Yeah, it probably would be very helpful. Now, we have some folks out there now. So, matter of fact, our kind of head of publishing relationships is out there. But no, I don't think it's hurt us too much. So
I think that it's a two-edged sword, right? Because one of the advantages in being from a non-traditional city is it does what's going on over there. It also allows you to maybe build a little bit differently. If you're hanging out, the classic example of groupthink in hedge fund guys in New York is they go to the same bars, same restaurants together, and they're swapping stories the whole time. And it creates okay, this is the way we are going as a group. And sometimes when you're doing something truly unique or maybe bleeding edge like you are, being isolated and doing it away with a different model, following much more closely kind of the models that already exist out there with the MMRs, makes a lot of sense to me. If you're speaking to a maybe startup development person in Houston, what do you think Houston as a startup development collection is doing well? What do you think they can improve on?
Well, I think what they're doing well is they are experimenting in a lot of different ways. One thing that is really cool to see is even competitors, if you will, in the Houston space will still come together. This is it's probably my favorite thing about the city is the people are awesome. Yeah. There is just no question the people in Houston are just some of the best in the world. And I don't think I'm being hyperbolic, but so one of the things that they're doing is they're connecting even competitors. And when I say competitors, I do mean loosely to come together to kind of ideate. Because what you were just talking about in other cities, that collision that happens with hedge funds or VCs. I mean, if you're looking at Sandhill and stuff like that, I liken it to all my friends are married and have kids. Yeah. And I'm like that. They're all scheming to do fun things and vacations. And I'm over here going well, I can be fun too without kids. and it's the same thing there. Like they're all doing their own thing and scheming to invest in all these companies. And I'm kind of, over here. So I kind of liken it to that. Now, Houston with things like HX and, GHP is obviously doing their stuff in Tech Rodeo and whether it's the Ion or Canon or Station, just building these communities where people have, like you talked about, maybe we talked about this beforehand, that trust and coming together to talk to each other and feel comfortable in the situation that you're in, I think is really important. I think the city is doing that. Now, one of the areas that I have no problem saying is difficult is there isn't a ton of VC money here, right? There's not a ton of angel. Safe notes in Houston don't really exist, right? So I think moving away from the mindset of the traditional investors that were looking at energy, oil and gas, where there's very clear. One of my favorite things to talk about is people are like, "Hey, you missed on your projections by 10% this quarter," and I'm going, "It's a startup." You know what I mean? So that's kind of a funny thing because in traditional businesses, you can be off by 1 or 2%, and it's like, "Whoa, that's too much." In startups, it's like, okay, I just landed a client that made our revenue go up 400% in a month. So let's come on now. Let's cool it a little bit. So getting more investors here. Sandy from HX is doing a great job of. Full disclosure, I'm on a board with her, but what she's doing, the attention she's bringing from her connections in the VC space, I think is one of the next steps that needs to happen. Is just keep getting attention on Houston-based companies, Texas-based companies as well. So. The good thing that we're doing is we're experimenting, creating more and more groups, organizations where people can come together, think tank, collaboration. I think we just need more venture capital here in the city.
Well, I think some encouraging signs of the Han Houston Angel Network being the largest kind of association of angel in terms of like investments raised has been really positive, and I have seen a couple of safe notes in the they're coming.
We're doing a convertible note right now. I think it's okay to share. It's pretty much the closest thing to a safe note, and we've already secured 75% of it. But like Han and Goose, even they have. So I know Samantha Lewis, who was over there, and then obviously Stephanie. They're doing awesome things where they're progressing extremely quickly on both those sides because they were known as more of a traditional investment group. I mean, I think Goose was good old boys essentially, and they're like super progressive now. And then you've got Mercury Fund, which is doing some stuff. Yeah. So it's all coming, and the change is coming for sure. So it's an extremely exciting time to be here. And then selfishly, I want to ride that wave and be like, everybody get in on Mainline. You know what I mean? So,
as a fellow founder here, fellow supporter of the Houston founder kind of ecosystem, are you willing to reach out and give advice to people that are struggling with a particular thought, and how would they reach out to you?
Sure. So I always want to talk to anybody. The reason I could say I'm here today was I sent an email to David Gao. I'm going to say his name because he's the best person I think I know on this planet. David Gao owns Gao Media here in town. He's an unbelievable human. I met him when I worked in advertising. I sent him an email, and that one email 4 years later, we met like a week later, by the way. 4 years later, when I was starting my company, I went to him, and he was like, "Hey, I want to partner with you," and that's how we got our funding, all this stuff. But so people can absolutely reach out to me. cbuckner@mainline.gg is the most way. Now, I'll tell you, if I ever have an exit, the first thing I'm going to do is write a book, and it's just going to be like what not to do. What's rule number 1? Define roles within your company. When you're starting a company, a lot of times people are like, they'll do it with a buddy, or they'll do it with somebody. And if you don't define your roles, at some point, or you're relying on that person to do it, thinking that they know to do it, they don't, and then you start resenting them to be like, "Hey, why haven't you done that yet?" So that's a big one. Keep ownership of your company for as long as possible. Be proud and make sure you recognize your own value. Those are two of the biggest things that I always say. And then a good advisory board, surrounding yourself with good people. But I have a billion of them that I'll put in there.
Well, make sure you're documenting them because one thing that does happen after an exit with a liquidity event is I didn't even feel like a human being for a solid month. Like I couldn't even walk on the ground. Like it was. It was just otherworldly.
I don't know how to sail. I mean, I'm taking sailing lessons. I don't know how to sail. I'm going to get on a sailboat and just go for a month. Say I'm going to hope for the best. That's what I'm doing if I have an exit, because I definitely do need to like kind of decompress a little bit. But I love to talk to people because some of the biggest partnerships that we've ever had have been by accident. So I love talking to people.
So love the heart, love the focus, love the willingness to support. As you look at kind of the Outlaws and what they're doing, because they're pressing forward in a similar kind of like in a similar fashion into a territory that's pretty much unknown if you're looking at the global kind of sports world. What do you think they're doing right? What do you like about what they're up to?
Well, it's extremely exciting to have such a massive franchised team. There's Overwatch and League of Legends in terms of the two biggest franchised. There's tons of game titles that have franchises. One of the things that they're doing right is they are concentrating, as some people may not know, when this league started, the OWL, all the games, Overwatch League, sorry, I should say that. Every single game was played in person out in LA, right? And they did it in a 450 person stadium. And weirdly enough, back in 2017, we did the very first watch party for their very first game at an empty warehouse. And 700 people showed up to an empty warehouse to watch this watch party. And so I think what they're doing is they're really embracing more of that regional play. They're not neglecting the national or the global side of things, but as these franchises start experimenting more and more with regional play, the great thing is they know their audience extremely well. Look at all their branding. They know the partnerships that they're doing, the Texas Cup. I'm probably misappropriating the name of that. Forgive me, but they have an awesome kind of mantra here about taking care of our region and getting them involved. But they also just done a good job of branding to the region as well. So I'm extremely excited for very, very selfish reasons. I think every single franchise should have teams here at Houston for a number of different reasons. So they're kicking butt on their marketing and branding and those types of things.
Well, Chris, really appreciate your time and look forward to hear from you guys out there at Tech Rodeo. Send us a note. I'm at mark@riskprofile.us and C. Buckner at
mainline.gg. Don't do .com. I won't get it.
All right. Well, thanks so much.
You got it. Thank you.
Go be someone.